Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. I'm starting something new on the channel. I'm going to be doing hidden gems all the way through the alphabet. There's going to be a multi-part series which is going to be on this time every week. And for this one, I've done the letters A and the letter B. So what's going to happen is I'll pick 10 movies from each pair of letters that haven't been done on the channel or haven't been really given much oxygen on the channel. And then I'm going to talk about them and suggest that you watch them. So they're going to be hidden gem recommendations going slowly through the alphabet over 13 weeks. So let's get started. Number 1.
And for the last time, I tell you that nobody, do you hear me? Nobody will tell me how to run this state.
This one won an Academy Award for its lead actor, Broderick Crawford, from 1949, All the King's Men. Now, there is a 2006 version of this with Sean Penn, but this is your original gangster version of it. Broderick Crawford plays a politician called Willie Stark, who was based on Huey Long, the Southern politician in the 1930s. And if you know about Huey Long, you know how this movie ends. Basically, it's about a guy who starts small in politics and works his way up to being a state governor, and the compromises and corruption that entails. And the fact that he's crazily ambitious. He is quite fond of the ladies, and yet he is beloved by the working class. He's a demagogue, basically. And Broderick Crawford does a fantastic job on this. This is Broderick Crawford before the alcohol got to him. Really superb supporting cast too. You've got John Ireland in there, Joanne Drew, John Derrick, Mercedes McCambridge before she did Johnny Guitar, and way before she did the voice of the demon in The Exorcist. But this one is a high recommend from me. It's got a dynamic energy about it. It was directed by Robert Rosen, and if you haven't seen this one, and you have seen the later one, you should see the original version. It was based on Robert Penn Warren's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, and of course, because it is based on Huey Long, it's a bit of a romantic play. But I like this. I like the energy it has. I like the fact that it manages to say a lot in spite of the censorship from the production code at the time. And this is something special. It's almost forgotten now, apart from by Sean Penn, obviously. You really need to see this one. And it'll go good with, say, Citizen Kane as a double bill about the way the power corrupts. If you haven't seen All the King's Men, you should definitely do that. That is a really high recommend from me. Fantastic film, not to be missed. The second one, I'm surprised it's not more prominent in the film noir community. It's a strong film noir directed by Otto Preminger. It's one of 2 Otto Preminger movies I've got in this video. And it's a real gem of film noir, which has possibly one of the best endings of any film noir movie ever. And it's a big statement to make, but I think it's true in this case. Angel Face, with Robert Mitchum and Gene Simmons. The story... The story is fairly simple and it's got a straight through line. Robert Mitchum plays a guy called Frank, who is an ambulance driver. He is brought to a mansion where somebody's been ill and meets the heiress of the wealthy family who own the mansion, a woman played by Gene Simmons, who was an English actress who'd been married to Stuart Granger, and she came to America and started making movies there. It's fairly obvious at the start of the film that she's going to be the main kind of antagonistic focus to Robert Mitchum's character. And Robert Mitchum was really good at playing working class characters. His character's infatuated with this woman. And Gene Simmons' character, Diane, is really a red flag, all across the board kind of female character. When her parents die in a car accident, and there is some suspicion that the car had been tampered with. So Frank is a natural suspect because he wants to run a company repairing sports cars, basically having his own repair shop. And so this becomes a court case, and then Frank starts finding out things that lead him to suspect that his new bride is not what she says. And it's a kind of tightly wound little film noir. It's beautifully shot. It's one of those daytime film noirs where you don't need the deep shadows in the night. It's largely shot during the daytime. And like Leave Her to Heaven, it really leans into the fact that some nefarious things are done in daylight. And then it has a killer ending. I'm not going to spoil for you, but you have to see this one because the ending is something really special. and it comes out of left field, but it's entirely thematically consistent with the rest of the film. There's the back of it. You've got a few extras on this version of it. I believe it has been released in some markets on Blu-ray, and I like visiting this one now and then because I like the way it builds its tension and its story and then just slaps you in the face with an ending that you're not going to forget. Angel Face is such a good film that Jean-Luc Godard said it was the 8th best American movie ever, which is high praise from somebody who knows just a little bit about cinema. So you should check that one out. The third movie is one that I came to later. It's a John Huston film that I had a little trouble accessing before I finally did get a copy of it. And the copy I've got looks like it's a Taiwanese copy. It's from the early 1950s. In fact, it's from 1950. It's a little film called The Asphalt Jungle. This one is really a lot of fun. And it opened my eyes to one of the actresses in this movie who I kind of disregarded for a while. But when I saw this, I thought, I understand her now. It's a crime drama set in a Midwest river city with a really fine cast and a surprisingly beautiful ending. Now, this one is a tight, tough little crime drama. A guy called Doc, played by Sam Jaffe, has been in prison for 7 years, and while he's in prison, he plans the perfect jewelry heist at a particular location. Now, what he needs is a crew, and he needs someone to finance him. He uses a corrupt society lawyer played by Louis Calhern to be the money man, and he gets himself together a crew of 3 different kinds of criminal that he needs to crack the safe. He needs a safe cracker, he needs somebody else, and he needs a hooligan to kind of protect them in case anybody breaks in on them. The hooligan they get is a guy called Dix Hanley, played by Sterling Hayden, and he ends up being the focal point of this movie. This one has a lot going for it, and it looks like they've done a little bit of research into the criminal underworld as well. But the memorable thing for me is that the lawyer's girlfriend is played by Marilyn Monroe early in her career. And if you see Marilyn Monroe and you think that her kind of sexiness in cinema is kind of artificial and seems very mannered and not very plausible, you should see her in this film because there's a sensuality about her that really comes through in The Asphalt Jungle and blew me away because I was always kind of thinking that there was something slightly drag queeny about the way that Marilyn Monroe was portrayed in a lot of movies. But this one, you think, wow, I understand why she became a movie star. She is intelligent and sexy at the same time. And by intelligent, I mean her acting choices while she was making this film are pretty on point and really do deliver what's required of this fairly minor character in this John Huston crime drama. I like this. It's a tough movie. It's gritty. It feels grounded as well. And in the end, the criminals don't prevail because this is a movie made in the 1950s and criminals weren't allowed to prevail in Hollywood cinema in the 1950s. And so there's a kind of elegiac ending for Dix in this movie, and I really like the way it's done and the way that John Huston enabled a kind of tender scene to end a really tough and really impactful crime film. It really is something special. And if you haven't seen The Asphalt Jungle or you haven't seen it lately, I think you'll find it's worth having a copy of and really worth just treasuring and seeing the way that somebody with the skill set of John Huston can put together a crime movie and really deliver on it. The next 2 movies I've got for you are movies that were influenced by other movies. Now, this first one's from 1976 and is a kind of remake of 2 really interesting films from earlier decades.
On Saturday, 6 members of the gang known as Street Thunder were ambushed by the police. On Sunday, the warlords of Street Thunder swore a blood oath to avenge their dead. For the gang called Street Thunder, it is a day of vengeance.
Partly a remake of Rio Bravo and partly a remake of Night of the Living Dead. And it is John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13, which I like a lot. It's a solid, gritty little low-budget crime action movie set in a closing police precinct which is under siege from a criminal gang called the Street Thunder in a slum in Los Angeles. It was made for around $100K. This one has that kind of 1970s drive-in movie aesthetic that I like a lot. It's a solid film. It's solidly acted. The lead actor is Austin Stoker, about which people know very little. He'd done a few blaxploitation movies, but he's carrying the lead in this one. I think he does a really good job on it. And as the precinct is under siege, he has to recruit some of the people who are locked up in the prison who know what they're doing in order to kind of prevail against the bad guys. This one's got a soundtrack, which is done by Carpenter himself. It's got that kind of synthy kind of soundtrack. And the nice thing about this is an Umbrella release, but it's all region. So I don't know whether Umbrella's still selling it or you have to get it from eBay or something. But this is a really solid little look at the early career of John Carpenter. And I like what it does and how it does it. And the fact that it's that kind of low-budget guerrilla filmmaking where they do a lot with very little. And I've always really inclined to love movies that do that. I can forgive a lot for a kind of low-budget film that's tried to punch above its weight and delivers some really entertaining and confronting action. And there are some really confronting scenes in this one as well. But if you haven't got Assault on Precinct 13, you should get a copy of it. I'm sure it's available on some streaming service somewhere. And that one's got a few extra features. What it's got? Audio commentary by John Carpenter himself, an interview with John Carpenter and Austin Stoker, the star of the film, isolated music score by John Carpenter, and radio spots and original theatrical trailer. So this is one definitely worth having. I don't think I paid a lot for this one, but because I have that love of 1970s cinema, it's important that something like this is in my collection. And I highly recommend that you find a copy of it and enjoy it. Now, those of you who know their exploitation films know the name Jess Franco, Spanish director who did all sorts of things. A lot of horror stuff, a lot of erotica stuff, really a unique auteur of the sleaziest side of exploitation cinema. In 1962, he made a film called The Awful Dr Orloff, which is a kind of riff on Georges Franju's film Eyes Without a Face, which is a much better film. It's set in early 1900s Paris. A police inspector called Tanner investigates a series of abductions of beautiful women from nightclubs. The perpetrator is Dr. Orloff, a mad scientist who wants to repair his disfigured daughter's face with skin grafts from other women, with the aid of a slavish blind henchman called Morpho. Now, it stars Howard Vernon, who became a long-term team player in Jess Franco's movies and in exploitation films in Europe in the 1960s and 70s. It doesn't run too long, it's only 82 minutes, but it's got a director's filmography and a catalogue for Arrow Films. This was released by Arrow, come to think of it, so it's an early Arrow video release. You can see on the back, it's that kind of black and white 1960s creepy horror film, which is a little more transgressive and extreme than a lot of the stuff coming out of America at the time. But if you're a fan of Jess Franco or you just like 1960s horror films, you need to at least check out The Awful Dr Orloff. And you can compare and contrast it with Eyes Without a Face if you want to, but this one's going to come up second best in every regard. But nonetheless, it does show Jess Franco at the start of his career, basically pinching an idea from another filmmaker, but twisting it into his own unique little vision. This one I got from Cinema Cult here in Australia, and it's an English film of the 1960s. And there was this weird thing in English films in the 1960s where there were circus horror films. There was Circus of Horrors, Circus of Terrors, and Berzerk, with Joan Crawford in it. Done by Herman Cohen, who was one of the exploitation mavens of 1960s English cinema. And in this one, Joan Crawford plays Monica Rivers, a woman who runs a travelling circus. And unfortunately, a lot of her performers are dying in very gruesome ways, which lead the police to suspect that somebody is killing them off. She has a business manager called Durando, played by Michael Gough, who people remember was Alfred to Michael Keaton's Batman in later years. She's kind of got an off-again, on-again, friends with benefits relationship with Durando, until a new guy comes along, a high wire artist called Frank, played by Ty Harden, who people might remember was in an Australian TV series called Riptide in the 1960s, and had also played in Western TV series earlier in the decade. And this is a weird one in Joan Crawford's career where she's trying to play a sexy old woman, and to be fair, there are some moments where she wears tights. She's got pretty good pins for a woman of her age. And she's got a much younger lover, as you can see there. But this is almost but not quite in the hagsploitation genre. It doesn't quite steer into crazy old lady kind of horror. It is in that weird circus horror genre that the English people loved so much in the 1960s. Directed by Jim O'Connolly, and it's also got Judy Geeson and Robert Hardy in it. Diana Dawes turns up as well, which is kind of interesting. But Berzerk is a definite one for people who like 1960s horror films. It's not the best of its genre, but it is one of those programmers that kept turning up repeatedly as second bills in, particularly here in Australia, and second bills in cinemas a lot. Now, there are no real extras in this. Cinema Cult doesn't go in for extras. It does release high-quality transfers of these films. And if you haven't got this one, you might want to check it out. Yeah, this one's Region B, so you have to be aware of that. But if you're into that 1960s horror genre, you got to get yourself a copy of Berzerk. Next up, we got one of the most interesting film noirs of the 1950s. It was directed by Joseph H. Lewis. It was written by Philip Yordan. And it's got music by one of my favourite music composers in cinema, David Raxon. From 1955, The Big Combo, with Cornel Wilde, Richard Conte, Gene Wallace, Brian Donlevy. Its cinematography is by John Alton, who was the master of film noir cinematography. Cornel Wilde plays a police detective called Diamond, who's investigating the local criminal mastermind, a guy called Mr. Brown, played by Richard Conte, who did a lot of interesting crime films in the 1950s. One of Mr. Brown's henchmen was a guy called Joe, played by Brian Donlevy, who later on played Quatermass in a couple of films. There's an interesting scene where Mr. Brown kidnaps Diamond and tortures him using Joe's hearing aid by dialing the hearing aid up really high and then playing loud music into Cornel Wilde's ear, which is a bit original. The other interesting thing about it is two of the other henchmen of Mr. Brown are a pair of gunmen called Fante and Mingo, played by Lee Van Cleef and Earl Holliman. And the most fascinating part of this is Fante and Mingo are really clearly a gay couple. They sleep in two beds next to each other in their hotel room. They're very close to each other. They've got that kind of rapport. And there's no way you can't see them as a gay couple. There is that argument in 1950s cinema conflated being homosexual with deviance and perversion and criminality. But it's interesting the way the two characters play, that they are devoted to each other. And even though they are the bad guys, there's an interesting subtext, an interesting complexity to those two characters. You can see in the back there's some of that beautiful photography by John Alton. There's a great action climax shot by Alton on a very low budget, which is set at an airport. And it uses light and shadow like nothing else you've seen in film noir. This is peak film noir from that kind of aesthetic viewpoint. And it's a tough, gritty little film for its time. Cornel Wilde later on married Gene Wallace, in fact, and they made a couple of films together, including No Blade of Grass in the 1970s. Doesn't really seem to have any extras. This one's from Olive Films. It was in the public domain for a long time, so you will find public domain copies of this. But my strong recommendation is you check out The Big Combo. It is film noir at its best. So let's move on to an associated genre, and a 1964 Italian movie directed by the master of Italian horror and Italian giallo, Mario Bava. This one's a gateway drug to giallo films. If you'd heard about giallo and you hadn't actually watched any of it and you wanted to find out where to start, Blood and Black Lace is the place to start. This one uses some beautiful photography by Bava, the use of primary colours, the really interesting title sequence where he introduces all of the actors by posing them in front of some of the props from the film is interesting. And Bava had a genius for giving audiences a unique visual aesthetic. The story's about a murderer who's killing people involved with a famous Italian fashion house, and the murders, of course, are done in gruesome and imaginative ways. And if nothing else, it's beautiful to look at. The way Bava frames his shots and moves the camera and gives us these quirky, eccentric characters is terrific. Now, this one is from Arrow Video, and you can take a look there and freeze frame that and just see the tons of extras that are in this. It's a really nice addition. And for me, pretty much any Mario Bava film is intensely watchable. But Blood and Black Lace is the one I was trying to get into giallo. And Blood and Black Lace is the one where, yeah, I understand it now. I understand the aesthetic of it. I understand the kind of titillation and the slight sadism of it, and the way that it uses the genre tropes to tell really messed up stories. But that one should be in your collection. I believe it is fairly inexpensive if you look around for it. It is region locked A and B, so that means America and England can watch it, but I can too because I've got a multi-region Blu-ray player. Nice piece of prototypical giallo. This one's a Francois Truffaut film from 1968, based on a 1940 novel by Cornell Woolridge, who was a fantastic crime writer. There are parts of this movie I find hilarious. There are parts of this movie that are tight and suspenseful and horror. And it is Truffaut doing a Hitchcock in this sense and trying to make a Hitchcock movie. It's The Bride Wore Black with Jean Moreau. John Moreau plays a woman called Julie, who is walking down the steps after her marriage to her new husband, only for him to be shot by a sniper. And she is obviously devastated. She's in shock. She tries to commit suicide, but when that fails, she decides to go on a rampage, works out who the suspects are, and then she hunts them down. She's a kind of avenging angel in this one. Now, Jean Moreau was a little too old for the role. She was in her late 30s, but she's still stunning, and she's incredibly beautiful and incredibly strong as a character, as she takes on different roles to get close to these men and ultimately destroy them. It's Truffaut being a bit playful too, because there's an ending on this one that I love because it's a fitting ending. It's a better ending than the original story in some ways. I'm not always a Truffaut fan. I find some of his films better than others, but this one is great. There's some of the graphics on the back showing you exactly what's going on. And yeah, if you're into Hitchcockian style horror, or suspense at least, or thrillers, whatever you want to call them, The Bride Wore Black is one you should have in your collection. It's a lot of entertainment in a small package, and Jean Moreau, as I said, she is slightly too old for the character, but because she's Jean Moreau, she pulls it off, and her character is really memorable. And a lot of people have said she was a big influence on the bride in Kill Bill 1 and 2, and I can understand that too. There's no way that Tarantino is not familiar with this film. And the forthrightness and the determination of the lead character does have a lot of parallels with the bride, Beatrix Kiddo, in Kill Bill 1 and 2. So if that's not enough for you to give this one a go at least, I don't know what is. But you should have that in your collection and enjoy it. This last one's a bit of an oddity for the channel, and just bear with me though. There are times when you're growing up, when you get exposed to a grown-up film, not an adult film in the traditional sense, but a grown-up film. And you come to the realization, reluctantly, that there's more to cinema than cowboys and dinosaurs and The Man Called Flintstone. You see a movie and you go, hey, this movie has a mood about it. This one really builds an atmosphere and really tells a story that I want to find the end of. And for me, watching late night television, it was Otto Preminger's Bonjour Tristesse, with Gene Seberg, David Niven, Deborah Kerr, and Marlène Desmarais. It's a really interesting movie based on a novel written by an 18-year-old woman called Françoise Sagan, who went on to have a very long literary career in France. It's about a woman called Cécile, and it starts with a frame story. The front and the back of the film are told by Cécile a year after the events of most of the film. She's dancing with a man in a nightclub, and she does a voiceover saying that the man's her lover, but she's not particularly interested, and her life has become bleak. It's shot in black and white. You've got Julia Greco singing the theme song to the movie in the background, and Cécile does a flashback to a year before, where she's holidaying on the Riviera with her Playboy father, Raymond, played by David Niven, and they're holidaying together. They're really close friends. They're buddies almost. And they also have a woman called Elsa with them, who is Raymond's much younger lover, played by Marlène Desmarais. They're living a good life. They're both having their romantic intrigues, swim, hang out, go to the casino, go to nightclubs, go to bistros, have a good time. Raymond hasn't told Cécile is that he kind of accidentally invited her godmother, Anne, played by Deborah Kerr, to holiday with them into the south of France. She's a fashion designer, and she has some kind of old-fashioned ideas about how young women should present themselves. And so she and Raymond eventually become closer. and they end up becoming engaged. Meanwhile, she is pressuring young Cecile, who's 17 or 18 at the time, to act like a proper lady, whereas Cecile is happy being the libertine that her father has taught her to be. This ultimately leads to a kind of tragic climax, and then they fold the movie back to Cecile a year later, sadder but wiser. It's an interesting choice for Otto Preminger. Jean Seberg is fantastic in it. This is just before she did Breathless with... This is a little bit before she did Breathless with Jean-Paul Belmondo, and she holds the film together. Her Cecile is a really interesting character. Deborah Kerr is very good. This is the time in David Niven's career where he was playing flawed men who appear to be charming and have a certain status, but who ultimately are weak. He did this one, he did Separate Tables, where he plays a really interesting character. The one was based on a Terence Rattigan play. But Bonjour Tristesse has a really interesting mood. It's a world through the eyes of an 18-year-old girl, and it's directed and the script was written by a middle-aged European guy. So you saw this at Acme, the Australian Centre for Moving Image, where it was shown in the revival showing of it, and the audience responded really well to it, and the locations are fantastic. The characters are vivid, and yet it has this doomed melancholy about it, which just blew me away when I first saw it at a very impressionable age. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. You can also support the channel by donating at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. In a couple of days, I'm going to announce the winners of the 10,000 subscriber giveaway that I mentioned a couple of videos ago. I'm getting all of that organized at the moment. So I will do a YouTube short just announcing that that's been done and that the winners have been advised. I'm not advertising them. I don't want to kind of announce them in a public way, but there will be 5 winners who will get the prize packs that I mentioned in the previous video. Until next time, when I'm going to be doing a couple of Filipino vampire movies. Watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Work out some of your hidden gems and let me know what you think they are, because I'd be interested in the comments to see what other people consider to be hidden gems about which few people know. So until then, look after yourselves and I'll catch you next time.